Hey there, how's it going? This is Dr. Tyler Clacy, and I'm here today with Vanessa Brown. Vanessa is a current client of mine. We've been working together since about June. She is an NSTA certified personal trainer with a bachelor's in human biology from the University of California, San Diego. Vanessa came to me with some issues from a movement perspective, some discomforts that she felt like she just couldn't work through on her own. We've been working together since June, made some huge progress, and today we're going to talk about that journey from start to the middle to the nitty gritty to where we are now. So, Vanessa, say hello and introduce yourself a little bit more.
Hello, my name is Vanessa. I'm 26 years old. And I live out in San Diego, and I've been a personal trainer for 3 to 4 years now. But I've been training myself for about 5 to 6.
What were some of the problems that you were facing before we worked together? What was the reason you had reached out?
Yeah, so I have a deep love for lifting heavy. I think it's one of the coolest things to be able to push yourself to see how much weight you can lift. I feel like it's done so many good things for my life. But along my journey of wanting to, like reach my maximal strength potential, I started having some hip issues. At first, it was just like a little twinge here and there. I always had really pinchy, tight hip, and I have a history of lower back pain, like all the way from when I was a high school athlete. I'd have a lot of lower back pain. And so the more that I would lift heavy, the more I would have these just sensations in my hip of something's maybe not quite moving right, a little bit pain and discomfort. And it kind of came to a T in 2021. I've competed in four of Brett Contreras' strong lifting meets in which we do basically like one rep max attempts at six different lifts, the barbell back squat being one of them. And it was in my pursuit of, becoming my strongest self in that I started having a anterior pinch in one of my hips that turned into pain over time. And I've always been told don't lift through pain. So the first thing I did, obviously was consult Brett and consult my coach. And we modified range of motion. We dropped down weight, and that pinch just wouldn't go away. And it was in that time that I started to become really scared. A lot of like how I identified my self identity was wrapped up in me being a heavy squatter. My PR was 330 pounds, or is 330 pounds. And yeah, it was scary to go through that because the first thing I thought, after a couple weeks of it not going away, is like, am I going to be able to squat again? Am I going to be able to push myself like that again? And so I ended up pulling back completely. I saw a couple different professionals. We were trying to, like work through what was going on with it. And it got to the point where I just stopped squatting. I was like, okay, I can't squat anymore. Every time I squat, I'm going to hurt myself. And it was so demoralizing. It was like, it felt like I lost somebody in a way. It was like
Yep.
losing a sense of like part of myself. And so fast forward, I started experimenting and doing my own research, and came across like the physical therapy world and realized that in order to get back into doing what I wanted to do, I needed to use weights to do it. I couldn't just rest and it would go away. Like I had to force my body to adapt. And, I was started to become really interested in physical therapy, and I figured that it was a way I needed more guidance to figure out how I could get back to what I love doing. And along that journey, I came across your page, Tyler, and I could tell that you're really knowledgeable and you worked with heavy lifters. And you actually posted something about hip pain. I think I DM'd you and wanted that video that you're posting about hip pain. And yeah, and that's what led me to working with you.
All right. So you had mentioned getting to the point where you felt like you lost your identity, like I'm this strong person. This is who I am. This is who I am as a coach as well. Like it's part of kind of how you drive who you work with and who you can help. And you had also
Yeah.
mentioned that there was like this time when you just kind of stopped. You were maybe resting, you were avoiding certain movements. I'm curious what you were trying. What were the things you were trying outside of rest? And why do you feel like they weren't successful for you?
Mm-hmm. I tried limiting my range of motion. So I was squatting to a box. And the eccentric portion, the lowering portion felt fine, but it was still like that concentric coming off the box was giving me trouble. So I tried some machines. I was trying hack squat. I still felt the same pain. Even leg press, like the heavier leg presses with two legs, was starting to feel pain. So I was really trying like all the different strategies that I've been taught to, kind of work around pain.
Mhm.
I was just trying to find positions that didn't irritate it, but it started, the more I pulled back, the more sensitive I became. So then it was, felt like my hip thrusts were irritating it. So I stopped hip thrusting. It felt like, then my single leg stuff started irritating. So I stopped doing single leg, like all knee dominant movement. So I had the experience of the more I pulled back, the more it felt like everything started irritating it. Which to me felt like my injury was devolving, right? It was like, oh, this injury is just keeping getting worse. Everything I'm doing is making it worse. So a lot of it was just lack of understanding, lack of knowledge of what was going on. And then, if you're so emotionally tied to your lifts, it gets in your head and you start kind of creating these narratives of what's going on. And that's where working with another professional, like other people in the field has been really helpful for me just to understand kind of what's actually going on, what I'm experiencing.
Yeah, the tricky part of rest and avoidance. Um, I think there's a time and a place to avoid something. If it's super hot, your lower back is super hot, or this movement just really doesn't feel good, like maybe there is some level of avoidance needed for 3 days or 7 days or 2 weeks. The tricky thing is, how do I get back to doing that? What's the point of entry that I need to find in order to
Mhm.
get back into squatting? And once I do that, how do I move to the next step? And I think as movement professionals, we can sometimes get overwhelmed with our knowledge. We like know enough to be dangerous. And we start analyzing all of these options and all these variabilities or variables and all these accessory things we can do and corrective exercises. And then we see this post or this article from this other person and we become paralyzed by like all of the different options. So what was the thing that finally drove you to say like I need help from someone else, consistent help from someone else, instead of going at this on my own and using my own knowledge as a coach to continue working at this?
It was within those moments of everything that I'm doing is making it worse, or feeling like everything I was doing was making it worse. So it's like, okay, I've kind of dealt with twinges in the past. I know how to, like, my own kind of thoughts of how to modify like range of motion, single leg, dropping weights, things like that. When those didn't work, and I was flared up and in pain, I was like, okay, I need somebody else to help me. And I actually reached out. I have a friend of mine that's a chiropractor, and she guided me through a lot of that initial rehab process. But where it's been so helpful working with you is getting back, now that I'm pain free, like how to progress my squat, and like giving me knowledge and like what's actually going on within, like my body and the mechanics of it, and figuring out, how to take something that I know is safe for me, like that movement pattern being pain free, but then how to progress it to the way that so I can get back to actual barbell squats and full range of motion. So that was kind of like my tipping point, is like, I know how I can lift pain free right now, but how do I progress it?
And that's something that I try to get across when talking about this type of collaboration, right? Whether you're a coach, a physical therapist, a movement professional, the program itself is not necessarily the thing that's going to do it, right? You know this yourself. Like you could give someone a really good program, whether it's for fitness or performance or rehab. You could give that to them and they might be incredibly successful or be in the same place that they are now in 3 months. The real meat and potatoes, if you may, is in the communication and the manipulation. I think that's one thing that you've really capitalized on is asking me questions, uploading videos of your movements. We get really nitty gritty and deep during our monthly or every 6 week calls, and you really want to understand why we took that step. What is the next step? And maybe what are some adjustments? Because if you have a movement that is pain free, eventually there is another step that's needed. We use progressive
Yeah.
overload in fitness, but it's a very real thing in rehab. It may not mean progressive overload via extra weight. It might mean progressive overload via increased complexity of the movement, working on coordinating your breathing, changing your pelvic position a little bit, increasing depth. There is still the nuances of how to progress something. And when you just give someone a program, it doesn't always allow them to dive deep enough into actually manipulating that program to do the thing.
Yeah. And that's why I've been really enjoying working with you, is that you can provide the why behind things. So, especially me as a personal trainer, I know all the concepts of progressive overload within the context of building strength and building muscle. But when I was doing my own research and realized, when I was doing those initial look into rehab and realizing that it's all the same fundamentals, but as a physical therapist, you're using it in your own specific way. I realized that I had a big gaps in my knowledge, and every personal trainer is going to have within their own training and their clients training, people experience pain. It's just part of life. It's part of movement. And so to be able to apply the fundamentals that you already know and apply them to your clients training, your own training, and understand why you're doing what you're doing, which like you've given me so much context of that, like why you're implementing this at a certain time. It gives me so much more confidence and so much more like service to be able to offer my clients, and just
Yeah.
that the psychological part of being able to give people that reassurance that what they're going through, everybody's going to go through, that it's something that we can fix, that it's something that we can work through together, that we have, like I have within my network, people that I can refer to and learn from even more. So definitely it's been really helpful to have other professional knowledge.
Yeah, you said it really well in that, like, the fundamentals of training and rehab are very much so the same. The lens at which we're looking at those fundamentals is where the difference is, right? We are
Yeah.
both doing very similar things for folks. I'm just coming at it from a slightly different angle, which allows me to have had prior experiences with other clients that allowed me to see correlations between certain choices we were making and how it made something better or worse. And you have had very different perspectives and understandings of how certain choices have made things better or worse. And I think the summation of those things, those two things, is why folks are often successful in this setup. You don't have to be a fitness professional to bring something to the table, right? Like, folks know their body more than I'm going to. And when I give them a prescription and I say, please comment how it felt, where you felt it, whatnot, that information, that data is super valuable so that we can adjust accordingly the next week or the next month, because that's really where things kind of move to the next level, like you and I have. Like, oh, this feels all right. I bumped it up to 20 reps instead of 12. What do you think of how it looks? This is what I felt. Great. All of that stuff is really where the change happened. And you talked about how it's carried over into your own work as a movement fitness professional. I'm curious, how are you approaching your training and your clients' problems differently, um, since we've made some good headway with addressing your hip pain and your back pain?
Well, so I'm really fascinated with movement patterns. I think movement patterns are really cool. And I first started noticing them working out at Glute Lab. I would watch and listen to like other girls talk about their training, and I would notice that certain girls had similar ways that their form would break. For example, in a barbell back squat, we have this like a common fault, is when your hips shoot up. We call it like stripper squat or squat morning. Mm-hmm. And I noticed there's a group of us that when the load gets too heavy, we all have that same movement pattern of we, kind of dump a lot of the load into our glutes and our hamstrings. And, those people that do that have also the same tendency to round their back in a deadlift, and we call it like the round back club. It's like we all have like this like creepy back in a deadlift because that's how we feel strongest. And it started, I started noticing those patterns, and it was really interesting to me. I was like, why do the people that move in the same way, like, what do we have in common? Are we going to be susceptible to the same injuries since we have the same movement patterns? And just kind of got my brain thinking, and I wanted to learn more about it. And what's been really cool about working with you is that I'm noticing with my own movement patterns and my own problems, I have clients that have those same movement patterns. And so working with you and realizing we've done a lot of work on my internal rotation at the level of my hip, and I didn't have access to a lot of that range of motion. And working with you, I've gained access, and as a result, more mind muscle connection, which is great for like some of my physique goals. Having access to that range of motion for myself. And actually, I have a client that has that same movement pattern as I do, and a couple of the same structural things in her body that lead her to move in very similar ways than I do. And so I've started experimenting with some of the stuff that you've shown me, like some of the concepts, internal rotation, starting with something that's a little bit more like isometric, and then slowly giving her more access to her range of motion. And now that I've learned from you, seeing it through that lens, I'm able to apply it to my clients' training. And I feel like the more that I learn from you, the more I'm going to be able to take that structure and then apply it to like their specific, just like the way they move, and kind of giving them a broader perspective of like, yes, we all move in certain ways, but also should be combined with kind of exploring your body and figuring out how to interpret the signs and like what your body's telling you.
Yeah, first of all, just having any injury is going to automatically give you way more perspective. It's like this blessing in disguise. Like I experienced
Yeah.
this, so now I know exactly what you're feeling. But it sounds like what you're saying is, you know, kind of looking at things through my lens because you had to feel what we were prescribing you to do allowed you to come at your client's issues from a slightly different angle. Do you feel like you have gained slightly different or more confidence in the way that you approach things, or your confidence to approach certain things that you didn't feel like prepared to address as a coach?
I think so. I think I definitely have, again, like knowledge is power. So the more that you understand things, the less you have to speculate, and the more you can pull on your past experiences to help you guide your clients, you know, in whether they're feeling pain, whether they're feeling some sort of limitation, whether they're feeling just any sort of like discomfort or instability in a certain movement. I feel like what I've learned from you is, you know, I've been able to kind of extrapolate the experiences that I've had and be able to give them more solid like recommendations and more solid guidance that way.
Yeah, that's good. That's perfect.
Yeah.
So thinking about your journey that we've had so far, June, July, August, September, October, it's been about 4 or 5 months.
Yeah.
What was the what was like the big moment for you, if there was one? Maybe it was like a turning point in how you felt. Maybe it was a point when you felt like, man, this is actually going to be solved. Or maybe it was a time when you were like, holy shit, I get it. Like everything's clicking. Was there a time like that for you? And can you talk us through that?
Yeah, there was a couple different times. Um, the first time, so I've never been able to do a curtsy split squat. I classically, like whenever I was try to get in that position, my back would round. I'd be like super hunched over, and people actually. So I work at a glute lab, right, which is all about training glutes, and obviously it's like a strength. Well, maybe not as obvious. We do a lot of strength stuff, but it's a cross between powerlifting and bodybuilding. So we go for 1 rep maxes, but then we also have like more classic bodybuilding side of training too, and that revolves around training glutes for Brett Contreras, like the expert in glute training. And so I was saying that I've been watching these girls' movement patterns, and everybody, how they feel their glutes is a little bit different, right? Everybody has different bodies. And people always make fun of me because I do like this like hunched over, like rounded back thing because that's how I feel my glutes. And I'm like, this is so weird that I do that. Like if I do it in a public gym, you just have to like not care, you know, like
Yeah.
how what you look like doing it. Like, why do I feel my glutes this way? This is so strange. And my when you started having me do those curtsy split squats, it's the same thing. I'm like, if I try to get in a true curtsy split squat, I'm rounded over. I'm in the weirdest position, but like I eventually get that mind muscle connection, but just in a not conventional way of doing it. But through the methods that you taught me, I actually started by just doing a regular split squat, and every week it's progressive overload if you do more and more of a curtsy stance, you know, because that's getting closer and closer to that like true range of motion. So like in my mind, it was like more range of motion that way. And I noticed that using progressive overload and like getting yourself into that position under load with the slow eccentric that you program, that those tempo split squats, I was able to access more of my range of motion. I was like, whoa, this is amazing. I've never been able to get into this position before, but now through progressive overload week to week, increasing my range of motion by increasing, you know, like how much more curtsied over that back foot was, I now have more access to that range of motion. And I thought
Mm,
it was also amazing because the more I did it, the less rounded over I was.
mm.
And the tempos that you prescribed me, it gave me the headspace. I love slow eccentric, slow lowering phase. Uh, and I noticed that with that slower tempo, I was able to be more cognizant of how everything was moving at that level of my hips. And I was getting more range of motion. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. And then Brett programmed me last time he was in town or a couple times ago. He programmed me this skater squat in the machine. And every time
Okay.
I do this exercise, it would irritate my low back, which, you know, again, I couldn't get into the right position that I was used to before. Or to feel my glutes. And so, you know, he programmed the skater squat for me. I was like, okay, I'll try it one more time. Let's see. And so I was doing it. And after I did the first set, I was like, oh my God, like my glutes are destroyed by that. Like I've never felt glutes and I only feel lower back. I was like, wait, why can I do that now? Like what's changed? And then I was thinking about it and I was like, it's very obviously this work on internal rotation. I now can get into the right position that the machine is putting me into. Because in
Yeah.
machine versus dumbbell, machine puts you into a certain position. You can't really control it half the time.
Yep.
Or it's harder to control it. but I was now able to get into this really stable position, and I've never felt an exercise like that before. It's been mind blowing.
That's good. We love that. I think there's two things I kind of pulled out from there. One, when a movement doesn't work, our first instinct is to change the movement.
Yeah,
And when you have a coach who can kind of force you to do certain things or coerce you or like tell you something you don't want to hear, that often comes from the form of like, no, we need to stick with this movement for a little bit longer. And I often use tempo to change the stimulus. The split squat or the curtsy squat wasn't working. Let's make sure we're digging further into the tempo, change the setup a little bit to give you more access to the strength you already have.
yeah,
Right. And that's the second thing. Too often, people are addressing an issue and they become pain free or not limited by the pain anymore. So they want to make that exercise feel like a strength exercise again. But unfortunately, there's this phase when a strength exercise is simply just a get good at this exercise. Like for
yeah,
you with the back squats or barbell squats you have been doing, there's a phase when barbell squats can't really be done for strength because your body's still learning how to put itself in the right positions and express the strength you have. There's a neural component that needs to be achieved in order to start working on the mechanical strength component. And that's kind of where it feels like you are in a lot of ways at this point in your journey. But we're also kind of digging into some other funky stuff now and, doing
yeah,
some things like reverse hypers and some isolated hip work. But a movement professional like you, someone who's incredibly knowledgeable and skilled in the gym and the fitness, it still took you 5 months to get to the point where we're loading certain exercises that people see on Instagram and want to try right away. And it's not their
yeah,
fault. Like it's not anyone's fault. They see this exercise, a physio or a coach recommended, and they don't understand the 7 layers of regressions and progressions that came before that. They're probably going to put them in a better place to be more successful with, with those things. Um,
oh,
so last question. If you had anything to say to a movement professional, a coach, someone who's been training for a really long time and just feels like they have a good understanding and they want to continue to like try to do it on their own, but they don't necessarily feel like they can continue to do it on their own. They don't really know what to do. What is your advice for that person?
I'm gonna wait a second because there's a very loud trash truck, and I feel like you can probably hear all of
We
it.
can't, I can't hear it at all, but it's okay. You
You
can
can't
wait
hear
if
it
it
at
feels
all?
better. Yeah.
Okay, okay, give me like 10 seconds. Also, do you mind repeating that one more time?
Yeah. So for people who are pretty well versed in fitness, whether they're a coach or they've
Yeah.
been training for a really long time, and they have an issue. They have a pain in their lower back or their hips, and they feel like they want to continue maybe going at it on their own, but they also feel like maybe
Mm.
they need some help and they're not really sure which way to go. What advice for them do you have as someone who kind of had to make that choice yourself?
Oh, I would tell them that it's really fun working with another professional just because I think anybody that is a true professional knows that they don't know everything. Like you can be an expert in strength training, you can be an expert in bodybuilding, but you probably don't know everything in the realm of physical therapy. You don't know probably everything in the realm of like movement patterns. Like there's so much to learn in this space that even if you feel like it is something that you can navigate by yourself, it's really helpful. Again, like my mom always says, this is something she learned from the doctors that she worked with, that 1 + 1 = 11. It's basically the idea that your mind plus somebody else's mind just doesn't equal two. It equals so much more than that. It's having
Love
somebody
that.
to bounce ideas off of, having somebody to see things from another perspective, or, just chime in like, have you considered this? Like, I'll give you the example of this low back pain that I've always dealt with. I've always associated my lower back or feeling any sort of my lower back was a bad thing. I use it as an indicator for if I feel my lower back, it's because, my glutes aren't firing properly and it's a position that I need to get out of because it's improper. And you mentioned that you and I started doing these reverse hypers together, and it shifted my focus because for so long, this negative thing that I associated with my low back, I've actually like now I look at it through a different perspective. I'm like, okay, maybe the tolerance of my low back just isn't high enough. Or, maybe there's a couple of these tissues in there that were complaining every time I'm squatting. Like maybe they're instead of being through my perspective, they've always been too strong. Like maybe they're lacking strength in a way. And just that little shift shifted my perspective. It was one of those things I accepted as right. Like you were talking earlier, 50% of what you know is wrong. That was in my 50% of things I assumed were right. Like my low back, like feeling low back is bad. And now I'm like, oh, okay, maybe, just maybe feeling my low back is again just another data point, just another way my body telling me, hey, this isn't ready for this load. So I didn't even know what I didn't know. And it's been fun working with a professional to give me all sorts of different types of knowledge and fill in some gaps that I've had.
Good. Love that. Thank you. Yeah. And it's
Yeah,
been a
yeah.
joy for me. I like working with anyone, right? I mean, my thing is like working with folks who have a thing, pain, restriction. They can't get back to normal training or normal life. But I love working with folks who are really passionate about movement, whether it is a coach, a physio, a chiro, or just someone who's been training for a long time, because it allows us to talk slightly differently and say things in a different way. Like we can dig deeper into the nuances quicker. Now we can do that with anyone, but it just takes a little bit longer sometimes, and the clicks don't happen necessarily as quickly, which is neither bad or good. It's just typically more exciting when we're both like coming from a movement professional of side of things. So thank you for taking the time to chat. I am going to put your Instagram handle in the notes of wherever we distribute this video. But you can follow Vanessa if you want to learn more about her own specialty and her angle on fitness at vkb.fit. That's a good place to follow her on Instagram. Vanessa, do you have any other way for people to get in touch with you? If that's the good place, then we'll keep it there.
Yeah, Instagram's the best place. In the near future, I'll also have a website coming up. But that will be, I think it's a little bit down the road. So for now, Instagram's the best way.
Good. Well, thanks for chatting again. And if you guys have any questions about anything that we talked about, certainly shoot me a message, an email, a DM on Instagram, and we can dig into more about what Vanessa and I have been going through and how it may carry over or relate to what you're going through. Thanks.